The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and laughter, a sea of opulence gathered under one roof. The annual charity event, known for its exclusivity and extravagance, was in full swing. Guests adorned in their finest, each vying for the title of the most generous benefactor. Suddenly, the room hushed. Eyes turned toward the entrance as a man, dressed in ragged clothes, shuffled in. His shoes were scuffed, and his coat, several sizes too large, hung off his frame like a worn-out flag. Whispers of disapproval surged through the crowd like a wave. "What is he doing here?" muttered one of the guests, his voice dripping with contempt. Henry Collins, the event's self-appointed gatekeeper, stepped forward, his face a mask of condescension. "Excuse me, sir. This is a private event. You must be lost." The man simply smiled, his eyes scanning the room, as if searching for someone or something. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he replied, his voice calm yet commanding. Julia Bancroft, the event organizer, watched the scene unfold, her mind racing. There was something familiar about this man, but she couldn't quite place it. Henry snorted. "And who, may I ask, do you think you are?" The man held Henry's gaze, his smile widening ever so slightly. "I am here to test the generosity of those who claim to have it in abundance." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Marcus, the man in rags, took a step forward and raised his voice. "Before you dismiss me, perhaps you should hear my story. It might just change the way you see the world, and yourselves." He paused, letting the tension build. Eyes locked on him, some with disdain, others with a flicker of curiosity. The night was far from over, and what he was about to reveal would leave everyone speechless. Marcus stood tall amidst the crowd, his ragged appearance contrasting sharply with the lavish surroundings. The guests exchanged puzzled looks, unsure whether to laugh at the absurdity or to listen to this unexpected intruder. Julia, the event's organizer, found her voice. "Go on," she said, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "Let's hear what you have to say." Marcus nodded gratefully, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Most of you probably think I'm just a beggar who wandered into the wrong place. But what if I told you that this event isn't about how much money you can donate? What if tonight was about something more profound, something money can't buy?" A murmur spread through the crowd. Henry crossed his arms, eyes narrowed. "So, you're here to give us a lecture on generosity?" he scoffed. "No," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm here to offer a challenge." The room fell silent again. Guests leaned in, eager to hear more despite themselves. "For the next few hours, I'll be here," Marcus continued, "and I will judge not by your donations, but by how you treat those you perceive as less than you. If any of you can show me true kindness without expecting anything in return, I will make a donation, one far greater than you can imagine." Gasps and whispers filled the air. The guests were intrigued, yet skeptical. Who was this man, and what kind of challenge was this? Julia studied Marcus, her curiosity piqued. She had a nagging feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. As she observed him, memories began to surface, fragments of a time long past. Could it really be? Henry, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think we care about your challenge? We're here to support a cause, not play games." Marcus smiled, unfazed. "Because," he said, his voice now tinged with a hint of mystery, "what I have to reveal at the end of this night might just change everything you thought you knew about charity, wealth, and yourselves." The room buzzed with a mix of excitement and confusion. Some guests, eager to prove their virtue, approached Marcus, offering polite words and gestures of goodwill. But Marcus's eyes remained on the young waiter, who stood quietly in the corner, seemingly unaware of the unfolding spectacle. The waiter, a nervous young man named Alex, had been working the event, ensuring guests' glasses were always full and their plates cleared. He hesitated before walking toward Marcus, his expression filled with genuine concern. "Sir," Alex said softly, "you look like you could use a seat and some food. Would you like me to get you something?" Marcus looked up, surprised by the simplicity of the gesture. "Thank you," he replied, his gaze thoughtful. That would be nice. As Alex hurried off to the kitchen, Marcus turned his attention back to the crowd. You see, it's not the grand gestures that define kindness. It's the simple, selfless acts that truly matter. Henry rolled his eyes, unimpressed. This is ridiculous, he muttered, stalking away toward a group of wealthy guests who nodded in agreement. Julia, however, couldn't take her eyes off Marcus. She felt a sense of familiarity growing stronger, a whisper of recognition. Who was he really, and why did he seem to know so much about the people around him? Alex returned with a plate of food and set it down in front of Marcus. It's not much, he apologized, but it's all I could get on short notice. Marcus smiled warmly. It's more than enough. Thank you, Alex. He then turned to the guests, his voice rising above the hum of the room. True generosity isn't measured by how much you give, but by how much you care. He paused, letting his words sink in. The room grew quiet, the weight of his challenge settling over everyone. Many felt a stir of discomfort as they began to realize the true test of the night. Marcus glanced at Julia, his eyes hinting at a shared history. But tonight is just beginning, he said, his tone almost cryptic. The real test lies in what comes next. As the night wore on, guests began to interact with Marcus. Some approached him with practiced smiles, offering pleasantries and small tokens. Others maintained their distance, uncomfortable with the notion of being judged by a man dressed in rags. Marcus, however, remained silent, observing. Julia found herself torn. On one hand, she was the event organizer and needed to ensure the night ran smoothly. On the other hand, her curiosity about Marcus's true identity gnawed at her. His eyes, his demeanor, everything seemed so hauntingly familiar. She watched as Henry, ever the opportunist, finally approached Marcus. "I suppose you're enjoying this little game of yours," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be real. Kindness isn't something you can measure in a single night." Marcus regarded him coolly. "You're right," he replied evenly. "Kindness is measured over a lifetime. But tonight, we'll see who's willing to show it when there's nothing to gain." Henry smirked. "You're looking for saints in the wrong place," he retorted, before walking away. The crowd watched the exchange with bated breath, curious about what would happen next. Meanwhile, Alex continued to serve the guests, unaware of the drama unfolding. As he passed by Marcus, the older man stopped him. "You're doing a good job tonight," Marcus said. "Tell me, why did you offer me food earlier?" Alex blinked, surprised by the question. You looked like you needed it," he stammered. "I mean, it's what anyone would do, right?" Marcus smiled gently. "Not everyone, but you did. Remember that." Marcus's words hung in the air as the guests around them exchanged uneasy glances. A nagging sense of anticipation grew, as if the night were building toward a revelation that would shatter their perceptions. Marcus took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice resonating through the room. "Many years ago, I was not much different from this young waiter," he said, gesturing toward Alex. "I struggled to make ends meet, working thankless jobs while those around me looked down on me for my appearance." He paused, letting the memories wash over him. "I was treated as less than human because of my clothes, my circumstances. It wasn't until one person, a stranger, showed me genuine kindness that my life began to change." The guests listened in rapt silence, captivated by his story. They could sense that this was more than just a tale, it was a revelation. Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Tonight, I wanted to see who among you would show the same kindness I once received. Not out of pity, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do." As he finished speaking, Marcus's eyes locked with Julia's. She gasped softly, realization dawning on her face. Marcus was not just any man. He was someone she had known long ago, someone who had vanished from the world of wealth and society only to return in this unexpected way. The room buzzed with speculation. Who was Marcus really? And what would he reveal next? The room was abuzz with whispers, the guests hanging on to every word Marcus had just spoken. Julia's heart pounded in her chest. How could she not have recognized him earlier? It had been years, but his eyes, his voice, it all came rushing back. Marcus Dalton, the young man who had once lived in her neighborhood, always cheerful despite his modest means, had vanished without a trace. Now, here he was, standing before everyone in rags, challenging the very foundation of their beliefs. The room's silence was thick with tension and curiosity. Some guests fidgeted nervously, while others stared intently, waiting for the next twist. Henry, unable to contain his disdain, sneered. "So, you're saying you were once in our shoes? A millionaire who lost it all? Or are you just another con artist weaving a sob story for attention?" Marcus remained calm, his eyes never leaving Henry's. "I'm not here to beg for pity, nor to impress you with stories of wealth lost or gained," he replied evenly. "I'm here to show you that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't what's in your bank account, but what's in your heart." Julia stepped forward, her voice trembling as she addressed Marcus. You're Marcus Dalton, aren't you?" she asked, drawing the attention of the room. "The boy who used to live down the street from my family?" Marcus turned to her, his expression softening. "Yes, Julia. It's been a long time." Gasps and murmurs filled the air as realization struck many. Some of the guests who had known of Marcus back then now remembered the story. The young man who had left their community with nothing, vanishing into obscurity, only to return now under the strangest of circumstances. "What happened to you?" Julia pressed, her voice both curious and cautious. Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the crowd. "After I left, I worked odd jobs, learned a few trades, and struggled through years of hardship," he began. "I wasn't fortunate enough to have wealth handed to me. I had to fight for every bit of it, and in that fight, I encountered many people, some kind, others not. But what stayed with me was the kindness of a few who never asked for anything in return." The guests listened intently, many now too absorbed to even glance at their watches or phones. Marcus had them hooked, his story slowly unraveling a mystery they hadn't expected. "Tonight, I am not here as a beggar," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. "I am here as a man who understands both poverty and wealth, here to make you confront what true charity means." As the evening progressed, Marcus watched the interactions around him. Most guests now eyed him with a mixture of intrigue and wariness. They began to shift their behavior, engaging in small acts of generosity toward one another, hoping to catch Marcus's approval. Henry, still suspicious and ever the skeptic, decided to test Marcus's resolve. He walked up to Alex, the waiter, and handed him a large sum of cash. "Here," he said loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. "You've been working hard tonight. Take this and treat yourself." Alex hesitated, looking at Marcus, unsure of how to respond. Marcus, catching the tension in the air, approached them. "Is this generosity or a performance?" he asked Henry, his voice low yet commanding. "Are you doing this out of the kindness of your heart, or because you want to prove something?" Henry's eyes blazed with anger. "Who are you to judge me?" he snapped. "I'm giving. Isn't that enough?" Marcus shook his head. "Giving to show off isn't charity. True charity comes from a place of empathy and humility." Henry scoffed and stormed off, leaving the cash in Alex's hand. The room was now thick with a mix of discomfort and introspection. Everyone had their own version of charity, but tonight Marcus was forcing them to question their intentions. Julia watched from a distance, her mind whirling. This was not the charity event she had envisioned. It was turning into something far more profound. She found herself drawn to Marcus's words, unable to shake the feeling that he was right. As the evening neared its conclusion, Marcus approached the podium at the front of the room. "I've seen enough tonight," he began, his voice carrying an air of finality that made everyone's breath catch. "And now, it's time to reveal what I promised from the beginning." The guests gathered around the podium, their faces a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Marcus let the silence build, his eyes scanning the room, ensuring he had everyone's undivided attention. "When I arrived here tonight," he began, "I wanted to see who among you could show true generosity, the kind that doesn't require an audience or a reward. And I must say, I'm both surprised and disappointed." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Disappointment. They had donated, offered words of encouragement, and even handed money to strangers. What more could he expect? "There were some small acts of kindness," Marcus continued, his gaze now fixed on Alex, "like the young man who offered me food without hesitation or expectation. That is true charity, compassion given freely, without the need for recognition." A ripple of realization washed over the guests. Some hung their heads, while others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own motives had been less than pure. Marcus then reached into his tattered jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Now, for the revelation I promised," he said, holding the envelope aloft. "I did not come here tonight to ask for money or to trick you into charity. I came here to offer something far greater." The room fell silent, all eyes on the envelope. Julia's heart raced. What could it contain? Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a check. Gasps echoed around the room as the guests glimpsed the number written on it. $10 million. "This," Marcus declared, "is my donation to the charity tonight, but it comes with a condition." Henry, despite himself, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "And what condition is that?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Marcus met his gaze steadily. "The condition is that each of you must make a pledge, not of money, but of actions. You must promise to perform one act of kindness every day for the next year, not for fame, not for recognition, but simply to make the world a little better." As the guests absorbed his words, Marcus looked at them one by one, his expression firm yet hopeful. "The question now," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "is whether you are willing to change, not for the promise of wealth, but for the promise of a better world." Silence reigned as the guests processed the magnitude of Marcus's words. Julia felt a swell of emotion rise within her. For the first time, she saw beyond the glitz and glamour of the event. This wasn't about a check or a display of wealth. It was about a call to action that went beyond material possessions. Henry, for once, was speechless. His gaze fell to the floor as he contemplated his behavior throughout the night. Perhaps, he realized, he had missed the point entirely. One by one, the guests approached Marcus. They extended their hands, not with the intention of praise, but with a newfound resolve. They pledged to accept his challenge, to be kinder, more selfless, and to embrace the power of simple acts of humanity. Alex, the young waiter, was the last to approach. "Thank you," he said quietly, "not just for the challenge, but for showing us what real charity looks like." Marcus nodded, his eyes warm. "Remember, Alex, it's not the grand gestures that change the world. It's the small ones, done with love." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus turned to Julia. "You always had a good heart," he said softly. "The question is, what will you do with it now?" Julia met his gaze, feeling a surge of determination. "I'll do better," she replied. "We all will." The story of Marcus Dalton's challenge at the charity event spread far and wide, inspiring countless others to look beyond the surface and embrace the true spirit of giving. As you listen to this story, ask yourself, what can you do today to make the world a little brighter? Share this story if it touched you, and let's start a chain of kindness that knows no bounds. Subscribe for more tales that challenge, inspire, and move the heart.